Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings, but I'ma be alright. Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings.
Hey, well, good day, everyone, and welcome to the New Jersey Psychological's podcast, Power to Spoken Word. This is where you can get information about psychology and about psychologists in New Jersey. And it's a resource for everyone who lives, works, and plays in New Jersey. So I want to really introduce our second installment of our book club series. So, y'all number two, so that really means something. And so I want to talk today. We're really doing a follow-up and a message that's connected to the statement that NJPA did about George Floyd's death, but also the continued conversation on how can we move forward. So I was excited about hearing about this book when I got the email blast from a colleague, and I thought that y'all would provide a really good platform. And I think an unexpected and surprising resource, particularly when I got a little bit of the background too. So I can't wait for the audience to get that. So let me introduce our guests. Today. I want to first start with Dr. Valerie Harrison. And I noticed we can go to first names later, but when I read all y'all stuff, I said, everybody's a doctor. So I'll make sure everybody know that. So I said, I'll do that. Then we can go to Val, Katie, whatever. So, but Dr. Valerie Harrison believes that we are strengthened when we embrace our connections to each other. Her intellectual curiosity has made her a lifelong learner who seeks opportunities to learn from others and also share what she has learned. Dr. Harrison's formal pursuit of knowledge includes earning a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Virginia, a Juris Doctorate from Virginia University School of Law, and a master's degree in liberal arts and a doctor of philosophy degree in African American studies, both from Temple University. African American studies, a Philadelphia native and proud graduate of the Philadelphia High School for Girls. I graduated from Central. I didn't know that. As an attorney, Dr. Harrison enjoyed both a corporate legal career and a church-based legal ministry. She provided leadership to a legal ministry that provided free services for the community, ranging from criminal record expungement and wills preparation for seniors to career workshops for teens and young adults. Inspired by her own passion for learning, Dr. Harrison was easily drawn to higher education. She came to Temple University as a member of its in-house legal team and now serves as a senior advisor to Temple's president, leading the initiative to strengthen the university's effort around diversity, equity, and inclusion. As an educator, Dr. Harrison's research and teaching interests involve issues of race, education, and the law. She's an adjunct professor at Temple University and a regular speaker at the MKA Institute and the SIVA Enrichment Academy, organizations dedicated to building Black cultural esteem. Dr. Harrison also served as general counsel at Arcadia University and Lincoln University and as acting president at Lincoln. During Dr. Harrison's tenure as acting president, the university reestablished the African American Studies major. Dr. Harrison finds her volunteer roles as chair of the Art Sanctuary Board of Directors, president of the Philadelphia chapter of the Girls Friends, Inc., and member of the Metropolitan Philadelphia area chapter of the Continental Societies, Inc., to be rewarding opportunities to continue that tradition. Challenged at age 11 by the death of her mother, Dr. Harrison had the good fortune of a strong father who continued to set high standards and ensure the essential support for her development. This inspired her to co-author and co-edit Color Him Father, Stories of Love and Rediscovery of Black Men, a collection of short stories celebrating African American men. She's excited about her second book project, Do Right by Me, Learning to Raise Black Children in White Spaces, forthcoming from Temple University Press in November 2020. So I try to cut these down, but I love reading them so much. I said, we'll just take our time.
But you
let me
can
introduce.
appreciate why I don't want to follow that.
Well, listen, I love yours too. I was like, listen, I can't. I would tell you, I can't compete either. So welcome to the club.
Okay, you and I'll just humbly enjoy this space with her.
Yes, we're in great company. We're in
Yes,
great
we
company.
are.
Dr. Catherine Katie Peach D'Angelo grew up in Pasadena, Maryland, around crab traps and horse farms, and gave Katie a dash of Southern charm to soften her relentless pursuit of changing the world. Her pen to paper style is deeply influenced by her parents' greatest gift: humor, resilience, a Jesuit education, and love for words. Once Dr. D'Angelo came to Philly for college at the age of 17, she quickly dropped her anchor for the long term and has never left. After graduating from St. Joseph University, Dr. D'Angelo went right to work for the Archdiocese Office for Youth and Young Adults. The combination of time with gifted young students and her deep yearning to continue learning prompted her to start a master's degree at night while supporting students on her day job. Once completed, Dr. D'Angelo's love for education guided her to a fulfilling career at Temple University, an institution that promotes access to a diverse community of learners and engaging students in their discovery of self, others, and the world. Dr. D'Angelo currently serves as the University Assistant Vice President for Financial Administration and Planning, and that is a lot. I was like, wow, we got two power brokers here. I was an alum. I don't know what that gets me, but so not only has Temple been a fierce source of learning, challenge, and community, Dr. D'Angelo has begun and cultivated meaningful and life-changing relationships, like the one with her Do Right By Me co-author, Dr. Valerie Harrison. Earning a doctorate from Temple's College of Education not only marked a crowning personal achievement for Dr. D'Angelo, but was more meaningful holding her son on her hip for the hooding ceremony. I thought that was really nice. So again, I want to welcome y'all. I know we took some time, but I felt like even the context of who you are is important in terms of like the story we plan on sharing today. And with the second installment, we're going to focus on the book Do Right By Me, Learning to Raise Black Children in White Spaces. And as the title suggests, the focus is on health and welfare of Black children. However, the book is important for anyone who wants to go beyond an awareness of racism, which I think is important, to the next steps of understanding how racism still operates in the lives of Black people, regardless of socioeconomic class, and then doing something about it. Dr. Harrison and Dr. D'Angelo have gathered some of the best scholarship, research, and ideas and wrapped them in our personal stories. What emerged was an uplifting resource for anyone who cares about a better future. And I think we want to spend some time on that last point, really, that y'all have been striving with this book about a better future. I think we feel, and I would love to hear your opinions, but I do feel like we're in a new normal. I think race relations, the conversations about race are different. I think the energy about how we're going to be moving forward with race is going to be different. I think the question and the concern for a lot of people is, can we sustain it? Can it translate into tangible practices, not just what we see in terms of relationships, legislation, policy, but in just everyday living, where we truly can say everybody has the same opportunities to be anything and everything that America can offer. So what I wanted to do before we really get into the meat and potatoes of the book is really talk about, how did y'all get here? I'm curious if y'all could share the story of the becoming of Do Right By Me.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, we'll start with Katie and then jump to Valerie.
Sure. Well, I think that's the easiest. If we start with the inspiration, what kind of got us started on this path was my son, Gabriel, who is now 8 years old, and who my husband, Mike, and I adopted from birth. Mike and I are both white, and Gabriel is a beautiful biracial boy. And unlike parents who buy into the colorblind or post-racial ideology, Mike and I really needed to confront head-on the reality that we would need to equip our son for an experience far more complex than anything we ourselves had ever experienced. And very fortunately, I was not alone, Dr. Harrison.
Yeah, and Daniel, thank you again for this opportunity to share with you, and it is great to see you. We found out that Mike and Katie weren't the only parents struggling with this issue. Often when I had an opportunity to speak at conferences, I would be approached by white women who were raising Black children, daughters mainly, and these women shared their concerns and questions about everything, Daniel, from hair care to how do I affirm their body image, to how do I build a diverse community. And for the daughters, where Black female achievement was the norm for them. While they had some television images, they had Michelle Obama, they had Oprah Winfrey, for example. They wanted examples of Black female leadership and achievement that their daughters could personally identify with and that were a part of their community of support. So it was clear to me from Katie and from these women that white parents of Black children wanted badly to parent well, but they had real questions about racism, about culture, about identity. And so Katie and I have worked together at Temple for almost 20 years. And I came back from a conference in October of 2018 in Chicago. And Katie called me and she said, you know what, Val, we need to write a book, but I don't know what about. And I said, you know what, I know what about. Her office is 2 floors down from mine. And I went down to her office. And in that discussion in her office that day, then we began putting the framework together for Do Right by Me.
Wow. I mean, that's exciting. I think what struck me about the process was when I first thought about it, I just thought it was like a book around just general parenting, just like, oh, like, okay, I got Black, babies, like, like they grown, almost grown babies, but babies.
Right.
And, but I was thinking, oh, this would be interesting in terms of thinking about the framework you need in order to sort of take care of them. So, and I guess, and kind of make you talking a little bit about the passion, talk about the process. How did you go around gathering the information and even to sort of create a coherent conversation about a very uncomfortable topic?
Yep.
So Valerie, whoever wants to start.
Sure. I mean, so really the nature of Do Right by Me is it's a back and forth exchange between me and Val, very much for that reason. This could be an uncomfortable topic. And so how better to do this than within the framework of 2 close friends engaging the world and what's happening through the lens of our experience and informed by our professional lives in education, and as educators. So I guess it was about 18 months ago, which is crazy to feels like 100 now, years. But about 18 months ago, we decided that each chapter would include a story, so that personal element, supported by research. And we wanted to make research more accessible to readers. And then offer practical tips. Okay, now I know this, what do I do with it? And so even before my husband and I knew about Gabriel, Val and I were in frequent and deep conversations of all that would be necessary to parent a child of a different race. And knowing Val for, about 20 years, this was more than her sowing her wisdom into me. It was the beginning of her sowing wisdom into our future family. And so the process turned out to be more than writing a book. It really was a process of self-discovery and developing relationships.
I like that. Val, any other thoughts?
What happened actually is, as it unfolded, it became very clear to us that the book should not be limited just to white parents of Black children, but to parents of origin, for example, of Black and biracial children, but also anyone who is part of a community that cares about the welfare of Black children. And so it, while we started with a relatively narrow focus, at the end of the project, it became very clear to us that the principles in the book just had very broad application.
And I'm wondering, because as you were thinking through, I mean, who knew that y'all would land on a moment that we're in right now?
Exactly.
So I'm wondering, because I've had like conversations with sort of institutions, agencies around sort of anti-racism work, and the level of discomfort it was palpable, to say the least, in terms of the silence, the idea that I don't know if I'm even prepared to even acknowledge this, let alone walk through a process. So I'm wondering, did y'all have to confront any of the I guess any challenges or obstacles? Because like the day we're in now, I feel like it's a breeze. But I'm wondering, as you were 18 months or so ago, did you get any kind of funny looks or this not going to fly conversation?
It's interesting. A number of theorists believe that people can only stretch in small increments in terms of comprehending higher levels of consciousness. And so the principles in the book and the principles that you hear now in the media are not new. They are the same arguments that were in the speeches of abolitionists and the sketches of great comedians and scholarly books and texts and preacher sermons and, novels and plays and that kind of thing. But our book is an effort to wrap the truths in our story in a way that gently guides readers to higher levels of consciousness. And so recognizing that every messenger is not for every person, is not particularly effective with every person. And so we've tried to do this in a way that hopefully reaches an audience that may not have been reached before, in an effort, again, at the end of the day, is to move folks along a continuum of consciousness that moves you from an awareness of racism to actually understanding how racist policies and practices still function in the lives of Black people and Black children today, and then to be motivated to do something about it. And so that's our ultimate goal. And so you're right. You do face sort of resistance at every point. And so we are hopeful that we have couched these truths in a story that is engaging for folks, that is accessible to folks. There's a ton of research. It's just we're trying to present it in a way that it is interesting and digestible for people.
I like that. Katie, any other thoughts?
Well, and I think, we also really understood some of the nature of that pushback. And I mean, I can sort of come at it from my perspective. When we started going down the road of the research, I really got clear fast on why, the National Association of Black Social Workers back in the 70s were very much against white parents adopting Black children. But it was never intended to be as kind of superficial as that. It was because they knew that white parents must want to teach and show their children how to develop positive racial identity, and how to effectively cope with issues of race and racism. And so we know that Black children thrive when their parents, white or Black, do this. However, for 400 years of history, we know that white Americans have not been expected to do that. So, the single most important point for both Val and I is to emphatically show how critical it is for parents of Black children, whether they are adoptive parents or parents of origin, to do everything possible to ensure that their children develop a positive racial identity and that they never feel that they're just a failed attempt at being white.
It's interesting because when you talked about as a parent of origin, I guess, of Black children and being a product of it, I thought about that last statement you made about the notion of feeling failed as a white person versus being successful as a Black person, and what that looks like. And I'm wondering, because I think, as pretty much a parent, my concern, and this is probably going to get us into the book conversation now and the meats and potatoes, is that it's not as much as I can instill, educate, encourage. As a friend told me when I had kids, you make sure they realize that the sun shines and sets on them. And, in terms of self-esteem and feeling good. But it's also the one thing I can't control as a parent is life outside of that context.
Right.
Yep.
So life outside of what is safe for them and the relationships, and dealing with the blowback from that, where you see the erosion of all of that emotional and psychological investment. So I want to see if y'all could talk a little bit about that, because I think you're talking about this other piece, and I'm gonna go there for a second, it's a concept that was brought up by, I think, a Dr. Robinson, and he mentioned that notion of program cultural amnesia. It's this idea that you're pretty much affected by the current images you see because you don't know who you are. And I think part of the piece that struck me about that is sort of the comment when you said the notion of being felt as you're failed or flawed because you haven't met the white standard. And so that's another subtle conversation about how as Blacks we might feed into the model, like we feed into the stereotypes, the beliefs, the sort of the colonized mindset. So I'm curious, because I'm really excited to read this book. Even as a clinician, I'm thinking about how to wrap my head around it. But I'm curious, how can we kind of unpack that a little bit?
Sure.
Because I'm really kind of interested in this thought, particularly as we talk about moving forward and having a call to action for folks after the George Floyd, after George Floyd's death. How do you help people grapple with? I mean, because those are some heady kind of conversations and thoughts and dialogue. So I guess I'm throwing a big question out there. So but I don't know which way to approach it as a parent, an individual,
Dr.
or whatever. But
whichever
way. But maybe how do you help people in the context of the book to sort of grapple with that?
Right. And so we see it as two steps. Again, the focus of the book and the main premise is that Black children do best and thrive with positive racial identity, and that has to be something that is intentionally developed in Black children. And so we see it almost as when you're flying and the adult has to put an oxygen mask on first. And once that oxygen mask is on, they help the child who may be with them to put on their oxygen mask. And so what we're trying to do, one, is to help the adults move along a continuum of consciousness again, which is not always easy, particularly for white people. White privilege, Daniel, is so baked into American culture, and white people tend to be very invested in a narrative that justifies privilege because it's what they've known. It's very often difficult for them to even recognize that something is wrong. And what the something that is wrong is white racial supremacy. And people don't like the word, but we try to explain the concept in a way to understand that according to the doctrine, paleness equals superiority, and that this construction has led on the part of many white people to try to dominate all over the world and to use racial differences to justify slavery and colonization and oppression and terrorism and differential treatment. And so while every white person may not have orchestrated racist policies or have engaged in racist practices, we try to help them understand how their complicity with them and willingness to accept privilege that flows from them actually allows racism to thrive. Again, movement to higher levels of consciousness are incremental. And so we try to do this through storytelling. We try to do this in a way that helps people to move best. And then we also, again, the central premise of the book is that you have to equip Black children with positive racial identity. They cannot feel like they are a failed effort at being a white person. That's not the goal. And so what we do is we give specific recommendations for helping Black children to develop positive racial identity. From example, limiting their exposure to negative images of themselves. We give research helping folks to understand that there is an intentional effort to expose Black children to negative images of themselves because the science tells us that they will mimic that behavior. We also try to help folks understand that you have to saturate your young people with positive images of themselves, or at least balanced images of themselves. And then we encourage readers to adopt an African worldview, to understand an accurate history of Africa and African people. That a Black child in the United States' history did not start in 1619, enslaved in Virginia. It started in Africa as kings and queens and the developers of great civilizations. That makes a difference in how a young person sees themselves. We talk about an African worldview and some of the value systems of Africa that prioritizes, for example, communalism over individualism and spirituality over materialism. And so we give parents very specific tools and suggestions for helping to develop that. And so we see it again as this two-part process. But at the end of the day, we believe that what the research says, that with intentionality, that young people are able to develop in a healthy way, and to contribute and to enjoy life, and to contribute to a better society.
Katie.
Yeah. So I also, just to kind of pick up where Val left off, one of the key pieces is, when I think about you as a clinician, and when I think about maybe the people who would be listening, as you're working, we all have different roles, right? And we never get to just work on one role. As you were saying, as a father, how am I reading this book? Versus as a clinician, how am I reading this book? As a coach, how am I reading this book? And so what we understand, as Val was saying, if psych is soul work, my husband's a licensed professional counselor, disclaimer. So he reminds me all the time that psych is soul work. And so to the extent that the clinician and the client wants to stretch their own levels of consciousness, do right by me really can gently stretch you. One of the things I do go back to, we were laughing prior to the show with Ming about just how extensive our further reading and our bibliography is for this book, because it also stands on the shoulders of great writers and thinkers. And we've pulled them in as much as possible. And Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which good luck trying to get a copy because it's been sold out for a while now. And it's a brilliant book, but I also love how it should be read by everyone. But I love how he makes the point very early on in the book that if we don't do the basic work of defining the kind of people we want to be, we can't work towards stable and consistent goals. And I think that's true in your clinical practice as well, right? You can only take somebody as far as they want to go or that they believe they can go. So, as a practical matter for me, I started writing and researching this book from a place of defining the kind of mother I want to be for Gabriel. And this naturally, not always gently, revealed the various spaces that I am tested, as you were saying, by the classroom, the soccer field, riding in cars, seeing the news and social media and all of those images, right, of what's happening around us, and trying to shield my son from that and only getting saturated with the positive images. So for all of us, I think, whether you're the teacher, do teachers understand that they may have lower expectations for Black children in the classroom? Nurses, do they understand the role they might be playing in health disparities and how patients get vetted for treatment? As a coach or a mentor, do they understand how a Black child might just feel excluded from a team or a group because they look different from them? It's not because anybody is intentionally excluding them. It's that they don't see themselves in that space.
Right.
And so the key for all of this work, for the book, for anyone reading the book, the key we keep coming back to is there must be a desire to transform, right? You have to identify what is it that I want or need to change about myself if I'm going to get to this space. And so for me, how do I become the mother that Gabriel deserves? And what work is needed to do that?
And those are real courageous questions, because I think, as you were saying, and it's interesting that you brought up that point as a clinician, even as I train and supervise, I tell people I can only go as far as I allow myself to go. So I can't take a client any further than I'm willing to go. So if there's areas or topics or issues that are uncomfortable to me, then that's a boundary I'm setting for my clients, because I say there's going to be something about our experience where I'm going to be like, I'm limited. And you have to sort of position yourself to be like, Mom, I think that becomes maybe based on orientation, the career I do. It's like, that's sort of a natural bent, but that's not everybody. It's like people do sort of get to the point where they're like, enough.
The world would be a better place if it was the green flag.
But Daniel, we found ourselves in that very same position as authors. Katie and I like the Enneagram. We like to engage that, and we like sort of doing shadow work, because we had to look at the extent to which our response to some of the videos and what we saw whether that was actually representing something in us that we needed to confront and deal with, and was our outrage a level of projection? And if so, we had to identify it and call that out, because that's the same domineering and self-interested behavior that caused the problem in the first place. And, we like the way Albert Einstein says it, no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that caused it in the first place.
Yes.
And so we have been doing the work, recognizing that if, and I've said it to Katie, and I challenge her a lot, if you're going to take over a thing, does that deny agency to Black people who for generations have been doing this work and probably know best what's in their best interest? And so we engage each other in that way. And I think it was helpful to us, Katie. I think Katie agrees, because as we wrote the book, we started to disclose and to reveal things about ourselves in terms of our shortcomings, in terms of our flaws. And we became very comfortable doing that, but that's because we pushed each other in those areas. And our hope is that when folks see that we've done that, that they would try to engage in a similar process so that they can be their best selves as well.
And to kind of keep going with this, and because I feel like I had a thought about this conversation, but now it's going in a different direction. And I think bring in some of the more clinical content, because I think as Val was sharing about that, I'm a big believer in parallel process. So I think sort of whatever you and Katie sort of brought to the book, I think that experience will be conveyed to us as readers in terms of those points. And I'm wondering though, because part of what we're pushing out in the field is multicultural, like supervision, being conscious of multicultural issues as you're engaging with clients clinically from an assessment practice, thinking about that in clinical supervision, it's dealing with some of the disparities, because it's mostly white supervisors. And, I'm sort of in a minority in terms of training. So then you have all of that. So sometimes I have people who've never had a Black supervisor or a Black male supervisor until they got to me. And, and then you have some, who are just like, oh, I've had a few, or you have some who are just like, I've never had it. And we were talking about just in the course of our training, just the generations that are in the field, we have some who've never had a diversity class as part of that curriculum going through. You have some who might have had one, and then that was it. And you have the sort of trend to infuse it in everything. And then you have the group who is more social justice conscious, and but then it's also really kind of doing the work, particularly like a model we do at one of my sites with multicultural supervision. It's a lot of self-reflection.
Yes.
And it's a lot of dialogue, and particularly when it's maybe a sort of intergroup conversations where it's a lot of differences around race, gender, class, all of that, and being able to sort of address issues around what makes you available versus what makes you unavailable for training. But as I was listening to y'all, I thought about sort of maybe taking a deeper dive into the book and some of the topics around a couple of things. One, as a Black reader, you're talking about points that I need to deal with, like systemic racism, issues around colorism, issues around how I may have internalized sort of colonized belief systems.
Yes.
Who I am, and then what I may be imparting. But then on the other end, it's also, so if I'm thinking about me as a clinician, I'm like, wow, these are some of the issues I might have to deal with my clients of color in terms of wrestling with that.
Yes.
Then if I'm dealing with sort of a person who's white, it's the issue of white fragility. And sometimes it's not even just dealing with clients, it's colleagues. Where some of these conversations are so uncomfortable and the reactions can lead to sort of notions of defensiveness, to denial. And I like what the author of, Being Anti-Racist says. He says, like, he says denial is the heartbeat of racism. And I think when I hear that, I'm like, wow, that's a good point. It's like, because we have to be conscious and unmasking it. And it doesn't mean we have to be sort of antagonistic in these conversations or confrontational or argumentative, but we do have to create a space for dialogue and growth. And I like you're saying, those spaces of increased level of higher consciousness and awareness. So I'm wondering, if we can kind of take a deep dive a little bit, how do you manage that ideal around white fragility? So if I'm a white reader and maybe some of these things are sort of uncomfortable and they might lead to all these other reactions that I might not even disclose to anybody. So how do you sort of encourage somebody to sort of struggle through those points?
I think the way that we do it is by telling our own story. There is a chapter that goes deeply into that issue, and Katie demonstrates through the story her struggle with that. And I think, and our hope is that by sharing that, that we sort of demystify it in a way and help people to understand that you know, Daniel, at the end of the day, we are challenging really dualistic thinking. We're saying simply because you acknowledge that maybe you are self-interested or that you're privileged in some way, it's not an admission that you're a bad person or that you're necessarily racist. None of us is all good, none of us is all bad, right? But everybody is a work in progress. And so we reveal instances where we have exhibited that behavior. There is a chapter where I show that even though I am a Black woman, I have been the recipient of significant privilege by virtue of my position at Temple, for example, and how I respond to that privilege in much the same way that white Americans respond to the receipt of privilege regularly. And so the goal of it is to say, look, guys, you know, this isn't a dualistic thing. It's evolutionary consciousness. So we're trying to raise the issue so that we can confront the issues, because that's the only way that we can make it to the next level.
Yeah, I like that point about evolutionary. I like that. Katie, any thoughts?
Well, I kind of think about what this process has been just here at home, you know, for Mike and I, and I do agree absolutely with Val. You know, I think it makes people feel uncomfortable, but I feel like in this moment, maybe one of the gifts of this moment is we might just finally dispel the myth that we are living in a post-racial America, just because President Obama was elected. And that, you know, I think Mike and I are very clear. We are keenly aware of the privilege that the color of our skin has afforded us. And we've probably not so gently had these conversations with those closest to us. You know, Mike and I both we're flawed in the sense that we are toughest on the ones we love the most. And so, you know, so I feel like we've really made it a point to, we've made it very clear to, I think, our family and our closest friends, that our behaviors and our attitudes and our whims that we have been afforded just by the privilege of being white. You know, we could break curfews as kids. You know, we could drive fast. We could question authority. I could disagree with my boss. And we remain unfazed by the consequences. And so I think as we get clearer on that, in terms of our own experience and the people who are closest to us, that's been part of the developing relationships, is just, you know, we take it one conversation at a time with everybody who is, you know, in our immediate family and friends.
Mm-hmm. And those are really good points. And I think as you sort of were talking, what struck me was how, you know, in doing clinical work, sometimes we aren't around people that look like us. And we have to navigate some conversations in terms of allowing a client to educate us about their experiences. And particularly, you know, and I think the challenge now is really allowing clients to educate their experiences, particularly through the lens of racism. You know, I tell people, you know, sometimes that's discounted. I would say, I remember where it was a time where you say that was racist. People would be like, explain that. How do you know? And, you know, and then you just had to do the work of it. And then that became fatiguing. And I would say, I'll tell everybody the one gift of Trump, because he did give a gift, was I feel like he helped usher in an age around racial discussions that I don't think we've ever had before. And I think because it was like one of the unintended consequences is that I remember watching when he first was running in some of the media, how they was like, well, you can't call him a racist because you don't know his heart, to as it started progressing, people were like, well, we're challenging that. But what had happened, I think, societally is it allowed everybody to start thinking it through in a real way. And then I think when we got to the moment we're in now, we're just like, wow. So I tell people, that's a gift we have to give the experience of this presidency some credit for, because it got brought to the forefront. And I think we're now trying to figure out in the long term how to use it in a productive way, not to be divisive and sort of re-institutionalize some of those negative behaviors related to racism, but how can we own it as a country, everybody own it, and then how can we talk about privilege for all? Everybody is entitled to this American dream. And so as I'm thinking about that, and I guess this is another maybe thinking about folks who are in therapy and out of therapy, but maybe starting with the folks who are working with clinical populations that may be different from them, and they pick up this book. So how would you sort of talk to someone like a clinician if you had some thoughts about introducing the book or even some of the concepts to clients? What would be some of your suggestions and to sort of maybe bridge the gap and into some of these uncomfortable conversations?
Yeah, one revelation that Katie had in the book, and she has a great line in the book, is, and I think for many white people, it takes, they do not understand that their culture, that their body type, their hair texture, their value system is not the only way of being. And there's a line in the book that I love, and Katie says, as a matter of fact, my value system, a European value system, was doing me no good in this particular situation. And I love that line. And you just hit on it. And to understand the resources were not created entirely for the benefit of a European culture. And so that you are one among many cultures that are equal and that all have something to contribute. And so that is a fundamental premise. Again, it's not a new concept, but we're hoping that the voice that we gave to that concept may reach a different audience. The other thing for clinicians is to understand generational trauma, to understand the experiences of Black people in this country, and the fact that we actually pass down trauma. And so across socioeconomic lines in America today, you still see trauma in Black communities, again, regardless of income and socioeconomic class, that you do not see among their white counterparts. Understand that both in treating Black patients, but also in helping other clinicians to do the same. It's not just, one thing is passing down unhealthy coping mechanisms because of racism, but also helping clinicians to understand, again, doesn't matter how much money you make, the notion that you live in constant fear that any encounter could become fatal simply because someone views you as a threat. And so that is a very different place. And so I think there is, we try to be helpful even to clinicians in developing a level of cultural competence so that they can best help their clients, understanding another person's experience, because fundamentally you get the point that everything is not a European culture and value system. There are others that are equally valid. And that, I think, and Katie can jump in on this, I think that was a major revelation. And the way that we describe Katie's experience with that, we hope makes the principle accessible to people.
Absolutely. And I just, again, to add to that, I think, two other pieces that were really important, and we started the book this way, of all the chapters, and we hit all of, kind of the major sort of topical things that you would imagine. And as you said, there is a guidebook, there's sort of a parenting, helping a parent aspect to this book. But I think it is, it's bigger and it's broader. And we intentionally put the history, the title of the chapter is Trapped in History. But I would say the densest and most robust chapter of the entire book is the actual racial history of the United States, is an entire chapter. And for all the reasons that Val's just described, we have to understand how deeply baked this is into the history of this country. And so, whether whoever's getting this book, I go back to that first you have to have that desire to transform, right? Whether you're the client or the clinician, And so my belief is that you're not going to pick up this book unless there is something in you that has a desire to know or to learn, right? And I will say, I would love to believe that I would be this passionate and this in it had I never had my son, Gabriel. But the truth of the matter is we'll never know. And I'm good with never knowing because Gabriel has changed my life, my husband's life, my family's life in all of the best ways. You know, Val and I have been working in education long enough, and you'll appreciate this, you know, Daniel, with your background and your studies as well, that institutions and systems are perfectly designed to yield the results they're currently getting, right?
Mm-hmm.
That fits almost any scenario that you drop it into. It's inescapable. And so our policies in this country have been designed perfectly to yield our educational funding system, our healthcare system, our justice system, our real estate and financial systems. You know, all of the policy was very intentionally structured. And it's time that we commit to changing the systems that white people designed for their own gain. But I feel like this book gently gets them to see it. Mm-hmm. And then gently, you know, sometimes it gives a nice when it's called for. But for the most part, you know, it gently gets them to see there is something that motivated you to open this book. Now we're going to take this moment to convince you why you need to go further.
And you know, the interesting part, I know we have to get to two more sort of segments before we close, but Pamela Hayes in the field has come up with a model called the dressing model. It's like a way to you to understand your clients in context. So it looks at age and certain demographics. Mm-hmm. So you can talk about gender, all these other points. And so we integrated that as part of our multicultural supervision practice at one of my sites. But then as I'm listening to you, I said, what I feel like I have to add, because we felt like as we were processing it as supervisors, that these demographics didn't cover everybody's experience. So we ended up adding other. So for anything that you might want to share or disclose or kind of make someone aware of. But now I'm going to go back and add racism, because I feel like the experience of racism as a contextual experience has to be something that has to get discussed. Yes. So, you know, so I think part of what, as I'm listening to how y'all process and experience this book, it's almost like, just like we ask people about, you know, whether it's sexual orientation or gender identity, it's almost like we have to include racism in that question. Like, so what is your experience of it? Yes. You know, what is that context for you? And let's talk about what that might even mean in the treatment room in this moment. You know? And that comes from a lot of ways, because I think, and I love your point, Val, how we, even as Black folks, have to be conscious of not acting out colonized thinking and not become the aggressor. Absolutely. So we identified and we start acting like the privileged folks, and then everybody else catches whatever they get. So it's a balancing act about awareness and even challenging yourself and having people challenge you, you know, around that. And that sort of shifts me into the next conversation of a balancing act when we think about how do we move forward after the George Floyd sort of experience and, you know, his death. A lot of people are wondering, how do you sustain this? So I'm wondering, we have the protests, Black Lives Matter is being branded. I hope they're making $1 billion after all of this, because everybody's tagging it everywhere. But I'm wondering, how do we move into more, like, racism is systemic, so change has to be systemic. So I'm curious about your thoughts. How, and even think about some of the messages from your book too. What would you recommend for people to start thinking about how to sustain these conversations, so it isn't just a one-off? I think, as Val and I had in the conversation, we just don't describe this as the summer of 2020, and then you know, we're on to something else. So I'm open to hearing your thoughts about that.
Yeah, Daniel, you know, when we were young, we love this phrase. When we were in high school and in college, we would say, you know, guys would have sort of smooth lines. Guys who went to Central, you know, you guys had smooth lines, and we could always say, you know, we would say, you know, you can show me better than you can tell me, right? And so, that revelation makes me think we want to make sure that we're not lured into a space where we're asking for things that are symbolic because we want to win, that we see ourselves as the winner in a game, but that the gauge and the measure is actually meaningful opportunities for Black people. And so I think we've heard the voices of so many asking for better policing. And I think that there is some work going on in that area. But an area that I haven't heard as much about is a public education funding system that guarantees quality education for all children, regardless of their zip code and their race. And Daniel, I know that is near and dear to us because we are products of the Philadelphia public school system.
Yes.
And I think we are clear that the education we received, at least at the high school level, was a major contributor to our ability to get higher education and to be able to contribute on a broader level. But also policies that make it easier or as easy for Black people to participate, for example, in trade professions as it is for their white counterparts. Getting into some of the trade unions has been difficult. And so these are specific policy things that can be done. And so we just want to guard against being lured into a fight that is more symbolic than that and doesn't really translate into meaningful opportunities for young people. We talked a little bit about agency. And so we want to make sure that Black people who have studied this and who have been in this fight for generations actually have a voice in the strategies and in the solutions to it. Because again, a spirit of domination, a consciousness of domination and self-interest, which caused the problem, can't solve the problem. And so we want to make sure that we're hearing from people who have been in this fight. And there are a number of groups and organizations that have been in this game and who have thoughtful platforms in terms of meaningful change, in terms of policy and practices that I think moves the ball forward. And so that is our hope. We actually, in the book, at the end, we make an ask. We ask folks, are you committed to growth and change? And if the answer is yes, we provide a range of opportunities. Reading the book is the first step, but we provide a range of options for people who really want to get engaged and get behind those who are doing great work already. Much of this work is not new, but my goodness, how it would benefit from an infusion of resources and energy. And that's what our hope is.
Katie?
Nope, she's got that one.
Well, then I'll give you a nice soft pitch. Talk to us about what resources are available for the public and even clinicians. Where did you direct people for more information?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say, and special shout to Ming for providing information. We included information about where to buy the book, including the discount code to get your pre-order in through Temple Press, but it's also available on Amazon. But in the run-up, knowing that the book was not, it's not on their docket to be printed until November. And so we knew that we wanted to get the word out and get people connected. And so we built a website, dorightbyme.org. And again, thank you, Ming, because he's had the website up for everybody to check out. And so there we have some information, a little bit about us, a little bit about Susan Ragland, an incredibly gifted artist who did a lot of the work, the artwork and illustrations inside the book. As well as tons of links, everything from teachingtolerance.org to raising race-conscious children to book lists, what are age-appropriate book lists, everything, on race and racism, but all kinds of social justice resources that you can be reading with your child, but all the way up that you can be sharing with your colleagues and your clients. And then again, if they really want to become more of an advocate and an activist, we're also linking them to information. There's a huge and really robust, in-depth research report called Unequal Treatment. And it's really dense. It's thousands of pages long, but it is incredible volumes of research just to show about health disparities across race in this country. So we try to give people a way to get connected no matter what their entry point is to this conversation. Research for Action and all the work that they're doing, the public law, help me, Val, Public Law Center, the Philadelphia Public Law.
The Public Law Center in Philadelphia is engaged in impact litigation around a number of issues, but the issue of particular concern to us has been fair funding for Philadelphia public schools. And so the Equal Justice Institute is another organization that we have tried to sew into and to be related to. So those are two examples.
Yep.
Wow.
We're a little excited.
I was just like, we could go on for another hour, but we can't. But I really feel like that this has been sort of insightful. And I think for me, I felt like this was relevant because we really wanted to have the conversation and really a very strategic and conscious conversation about moving forward and ways to do it. And I think from the little things from, like you say, getting into literature or around anti-racism, that's something you could do small, all the way up to you're even kind of alluding to like philanthropic investment in terms of giving to resources to programs that currently exist to help promote this model. And then being a resource, like we were challenging our members. And this was actually, the statement came through Impact. It was through the Latino Mental Health Association of New Jersey, the New Jersey Association of Black Psychologists, as well as New Jersey Psychological Association. But challenging all of our membership is really to sort of do something proactive with this moment. And not just with yourself, but with your clients, your neighbors. So we're hoping that, as we're sharing this podcast, that's another opportunity to do something where we can promote this continued conversation. And I love the conversation that's based on research and evidence. So it's like if anybody wanted to say anything, they could say, no, it's research based. And that's something that, people, I said, we can always argue points. It's hard to argue research. So
Amen.
We can do it, but it is what the data is. So it's really good to know that the book is going to be allowing people to have some even more confidence in terms of that. So what I want to do is, before we close it, are there any closing thoughts? And then we'll just tell Ming to take us out. So I'll start with you, Val, if you got any closing thoughts.
Jess, we encourage everyone to check out our website, dorightbyme.org. And if this is interesting to you, to order the book, take advantage of the 20% discount. If you go to temple I have it right here, so I'm not going to wing it. I was going to try to wing it.
I think our members will appreciate a discount.
I know. Exactly. If you go to tupress.temple.edu, again, the code is T20P. And if you put that in, that you can get a 20% discount. It's also available, not discounted, on Amazon.com. But we just encourage you to take a look at the website. There are a ton of resources there that I think that we think will be helpful to everyone in their journey along, again, what we have called this sort of continuum of consciousness. So thank you for this opportunity. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Katie?
Yes. Dr. Lee, we worked hard for those doctors, right?
It doesn't. At this point, it says Dan, Val, and Katie. So
exactly. Among us, but truly, thank you so much for seeing this and creating this opportunity in this space for us. We sort of joke between the two of us. We're like, wow, we felt so good about the book that even if it was just me and Val who bought it, we were like, we're good with that, because it was absolutely a labor of love, but I believe we poured ourselves into it for all the right reasons. So I just thank you for giving us this opportunity and a forum to share it and get it out there. So thank you.
Well, I'll close with thank you for being available for such a time as this. I mean, I believe everything works out for a reason.
Absolutely.
And your book was written for a reason. So,
thank
you.
So at this point, I definitely want to say congratulations. I think we'll be looking for sort of this process. And I would love to even circle back, in a few months just to see what life looks like on the other side. So, particularly as people are starting to digest more and more of this. So thank you, ladies. Thank you, Dr. D'Angelo. Thank you, Dr. Harrison.
Thank you.
You can take us out whenever you're ready.
Disclaimer. This podcast is intended to provide members of the general public with access to information regarding the potential benefits of psychological treatment. This podcast is not intended as a referral service, an advertisement of services, or a solicitation of business, and is not intended to create a psychologist-patient relationship between any of the podcast participants and the listener. Any individual status as a participant on this podcast does not suggest recommendation of any such individual as a provider of services by NJPA or its affiliates. Thank you for listening to the NJPA Power of the Spoken Word podcast series. Remember that psychologists can provide meaningful insights to improve our understanding of things that matter in life. As experts in human emotions, behavior, and functioning, psychologists work with you to bring you the positive changes you want in your life. Be sure to visit the NJPA website at www.psychologynj.org and follow NJPA on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings, but I'ma be alright. Thinking about these feelings got me in my feelings.